Hello, everybody. Thanks for stopping by here. So this, of course, I'm Nico's Book Reviews, and today I have the absolute pleasure of having. Oh, I pointed the right direction this time. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Mark Timmony. I always do the wrong direction. Mark Timmony, author of Blood of the Spear and Starbinder, and this is the first book in the Eye of Eternity series. And I have to always take the opportunity to just show off how pretty this
Yeah.
book is too. Um,
Starbinder, the hardcover of Starbinder does the same thing, if I can get it out.
I
But
was gonna say I've seen
purple.
Andrews, and I'm like, it's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
So that's the plan with all the hardcovers going forward. They will all have a cover that will, and the color, a board cover that will match the theme of the main cover illustration, the color of it with the Cadonia symbol in it.
Nice. That was not even, I didn't intend that to be the first thing to talk about, but it's just every time I hold the book, I think about it. And
Yeah.
I know that some people don't like the trend of like naked hardcovers. I guess I'm
Look,
generally fine with them, but the naked
I'm
hardcover
one of
and
them.
the dust jacket.
I
Oh, are you?
actually, yeah, I didn't do it originally, and then I saw all these other ones that were, really quite pretty, and but I didn't want to just put the cover on it again, like the illustration on it again. I wanted to do something like make it a little bit different. So I was talking to Sean T. King, who was my cover designer and who did the Cadonia symbol for me. And I was like, can you make like a leather looking, actually it was his idea for leather, but I was like, I don't know, like a color and put the Cadonius on it. And then I'll use that as the naked hardcover.
I think it works out. This would look really nice, just like a leather bound book. I think you'd
Yeah,
really like
right?
that. It is nice too because it's like it's still definitely the book, but it's something
Yeah,
different too. And like you
yeah,
see this, like if I'm carrying it around, someone's like, "Oh, what's that?" It's still intriguing. And I
yeah.
always try and take my covers off when I'm reading
Yeah,
a book
whenever
too.
I'm reading a hardcover, the dust jacket goes off. It's like, no,
Yeah,
that stays on the shelf. It stays pristine. I will batter the book itself, but not the cover.
it's when I was younger, I was not so good about that, and so like some of my Wheel of Time copies that have been read several times with the dust jacket
Yeah,
on, and I'm just like, why did I do this? This
yeah.
was this was not a good idea. But
In my younger years, when I used to buy paperbacks, and they'd be like, "Oh, these are my books that I'm keeping forever." I used to cover them in contact, like clear contact. Not always the best job, but they certainly kept the covers nice and pristine for a certain amount of time. I don't bother
yeah,
anymore, but hardcovers, Dad was always a big reader, and whenever he had a hardcover, he'd take the dust jacket off, and I just copied that. So, yeah.
yeah. I didn't copy anything that my dad used to do because he's the type of guy to take the paperback and like crush it and destroy the spine, and it just
I destroy the spine,
it's
but I do
it's
it
unsettling.
evenly. I do it evenly across the whole spine, so that way it doesn't actually snap in one spot.
That's
It's
okay.
like,
That's a little better. I guess the interview can continue because I
okay.
was considering cutting it short after that. So
No, I'm
no.
sorry.
So we've got Jane showing up.
Hi, Jane.
I was gonna say must be closer to your neck of the woods if it's morning where you are.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Jane's, I think in Victoria,
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
yeah, which is south of New South Wales, but yeah.
And then we
Hello.
have Patrick and Derek.
Hey,
And
Derek.
yes, Patrick, they are very nice. Uh, oh, we got Mike Malman here as well. Apparently, the emoji doesn't work on YouTube here. And yes, Jane, absolutely, you should rebuy the book in hardcover. That is,
Yeah, and because I don't know if you got the trade paperback that had the chapter icons, but I redid them all. I didn't do it originally. The trade paperback is still the same ISBN, but there's a whole new hardcover now. The other one you can't buy anymore unless it's floating around in some stock somewhere.
well, coincidentally, you can probably get it at Silverstone's Books.
You
Um,
can. And you get a signed book plate if you buy it from Silverstone's Books.
I was gonna say that's yeah. There's the signed book plate.
Yeah.
So
So if
That
I
was
can't
you
send you
couldn't
one from
plan a transition
Australia,
like that.
that's right. If I can't send you one from Australia where it's like $55 for postage and handling alone, it's like
Yeah,
Silverstone books. And
that
if
would
you're in
that
the
would
UK,
be
the broken binding.
Right binding. I gotcha.
Mhm.
We got fictional escapist in the house here too.
Hey,
So
Chris.
we have we have a nice crowd. So I suppose we should actually talk about what we came here to talk about a little
Sure.
bit. But we've got a ton of like winding topics here as well, and so but I suppose we should have too. And it sounds like I think at least like half and half of the people here are familiar with the book. It sounds like, but if you want to start with just kind of giving a general description. So I've heard you do several times, and you're really good at describing
Yeah,
everything with the
so
book. So
the basic premise of the book is that there are two half brothers who are destined to save the world, and they kind of don't want to have anything to do with that. So you got to put the conflict in with the main aim of the whole story. It starts off in the borderlands of Aldania, which is one of the realms that happens to border Delmere, or the Deadlands. Um, and it starts off with Kyle attempting or participating in, yes, the map, lovely map there, participating in the trials to become a Castirian, which is a demon hunter. I don't want to give too much away, but like it's the first chapter stuff, so Kyle isn't successful in that endeavor, and then has to work out what's he going to do instead. Could he join the Borderland Rangers or something else? Meanwhile, his younger half brother Darian is studying to become a magic user, a Seralis, and he's making plans to leave the Borderlands. There's a local prince is currently doing a tour of the Borderlands, and Darian's kind of become an apprentice to his advisor, Tilak. And when Kyle is returning to the Borderlands Citadel that they live in, he comes across um, the markings of one of the demons that come out of the Borderlands, a ballworm. He returns. He comes across half of the prince's guardsmen who are leaving quite late in the day to head to another citadel, Sonoth, and he knows that they won't get there in time, and nobody travels the Borderlands and during the night. That just doesn't happen, and everyone's warned against it. So he's a bit concerned about that. Those guys go missing that night, and they have to form a party to go searching for them, and then stuff happens, and Carl and Darian are kind of marked as the heirs to a forbidden bloodline, which a summoner bloodline, and the story kind of takes off from there with them being chased and trying to get away and just live their lives and find a place where they're not going to be persecuted. But anybody who has the blood of a summoner is generally executed. There are no ifs or buts about that. They're just killed. 3,000 years ago, nearly 4,000, the summoners had a civil war and nearly destroyed the world, or the continent of Athame anyway, which is where everything happens. And summoners are now outlawed, and the only good summoner is a dead summoner as far as the people are concerned. So they get executed if they're discovered, or if a mark that comes upon the back of their hand, a symbol appears that indicates that they are a summoner. So yeah, lots of prophecies are involved in the return of the demons that the summoners had originally summoned during their war, that will destroy the world again. But a prophecy says that the Imperios, who is the most powerful summoner and generally becomes the leader of the summoners, and Imperios will be born again, and only the Imperios will be able to save the world from the incoming hordes. So there's where the destiny kind of lies in, and people thinking, nah, if there are no summoners, then no summoning will happen. So let's kill them before that comes to pass.
Oh, there's it's I love to, and it's true. The fun thing. Oh, I should say really quick. We've got shelf centered here,
Hey, Bryce.
and oh hey, and it looks like Patrick is
Woohoo!
ordering some hardcovers now. So hey, already got a win. But
Yay.
but so I feel like that segues well because so despite like there's a lot of plot going on in this book, and there's the kind of the starting which you explain, you know, with the two brothers going on their way. There's a lot of the bigger picture, and yet so despite like a really nice intricate description of the plot, I know you started with the world building and were just
Yeah.
really big on the world building and
Hmm.
built your world and had to figure out a story to tell, which
Hmm.
I find that so interesting because I feel like not everybody always appreciates world building as much anymore these days. I
Yeah.
mean, we know Stephen King doesn't, but I
I
actually find that it
love
just
world
popped in
building.
my.
If there's no world building in a book, I'm not that interested, and it goes on my pile. World building is my jam. So basically, well, my love of reading began in, I'm not sure what the equivalent in the States is, but year 5 in Australia, when I had left my smaller school and moved into the school that I would go into high school. So it'd start year 5, 6, and then year 7 high school starts and go through to year 12. And I went to this bigger school and went into their library, and I found this book in the library that had like this dragon on the front cover, and I was like, oh, dragon? What's this? And I picked it up, and it was Dragons of Autumn Twilight by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. And that had just come out, so I'm revealing my age here, but it was like, I don't know, 85, 86, maybe 87, but I think it's more like 85. And that just opened a whole new world to me. Like before that, I'd been reading like Roald Dahl books and all this other stuff, and I'd never really gotten into reading. It wasn't, capturing my attention. But this book was like everything I'd imagined. Like I used to make up stories about dragons and knights and wizards in my head, and any type of television show where that was on was like my favorite television show. And here it was in a book. And so from there, I went to like Raymond Feist, David Eddings, Terry Brooks, all of them. And I wanted to, but my favorites were still the Dragonlance ones. I did the Forgotten Realms as well. Um, and then I was doing Dragonlance fanfic, very bad and not even complete fanfic, but I was writing stuff for Dragonlance or in Dragonlance just in a notebook at home. And then I discovered The Eye of the World, probably I think it was about 10 months after it had been released. It was in the local library. And I picked it up, and like my desire to write after I'd started reading that just exploded. It was like, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to write a Wheel of Time. I wanted to do everything that Robert Jordan was doing. I wanted to create that sort of thing and do something that would make other people feel the same way it made me feel when I was reading it. But I didn't really have a story. Obviously, I was really young then as well. I was in my late teens. So I started world building. Like I'd read Melanie Rawn as well, like her Sunrunner stuff. I was really into that. And so I just started drawing shapes for maps. Really bad ones, naming places and trying to start like a history and make all these places individual to each other, and what's their background and what's the story behind there, where are the conflicts, what sort of wars are they, how do they differentiate from their neighbors. And I just kept building that, working in the background. The map became more elaborate because, of course, reading Raymond Feist, I was introduced then to the Empire trilogy by him and Yanni Wirtz. Janny, I say Yanni, it's Janny. And then I went and bought any book of hers that I could possibly find. So we had Sorcerer's Legacy, Master of Whitestorm, the Fire Cycle trilogy, and then she started Walls of Light and Shadow. And I love her maps. She does all her own maps, and I love them. I love the shape, the form, just the look of them. So I started drawing maps based on her style, which I found wasn't too difficult. I mean, she does them much better than I do, but that's what I started
Can't
doing.
compete with
So
Janny. I mean,
yeah, exactly. So I started doing that, and my map expanded immensely. And then it morphed and changed. The more writers I read, the more ideas I got, or sparks of ideas flared up. So over time, the map grew, and we went from like 5 kingdoms to 9 realms. And then I wanted to do, well, we can't do a breaking like Robert Jordan, but we could do a sundering and kind of make it like the cataclysm in that was Dragonlance, and things like that. So I broke the continent in half, and like it's a known thing, rather than people not knowing what the world looked like before they know that there was a continent here that sank beneath the sea, which was Nemestrillian. And so I just kept world building and trying to come up with ideas. And one day I came across a painting by Larry Elmore, who was another one of the Wizards of the Coast artists, TSR, back in the day when I first started, knew of him. And I really liked his stuff, and I was looking through his portfolio online on his website, and I came across an image of 2 guys battling in the snow. One had the look of a shaman. He kind of had a shamanic headdress on and a staff with a ram's head on the top of it. And the other was a knight of some description. He didn't have a helmet on, but he had the big sword, and he had chainmail and armor, greaves, and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, that's a great picture. That's a cool image. Who are these guys? What led to this fight here? And from that, wondering who they were, came the spark of a story. How did they get to that point? From where did they start to where they got to? And that built the idea behind Kyle and Darian. Were 2 brothers, and then I moved from brothers to half brothers, which wasn't meant to be any sort of a rip-off of Jani's Lysaea and Arathon. It just happened to be that I was thinking Raceland and Karaman Majere from Dragonlance, and rather than make them twins and brothers, I'd make them half brothers instead. And yeah, then their story started developing from there, and then more of the world started developing. And where did the magic systems come from? What are the differences in magic systems? Why are summoners more powerful and bad? Because summoners had originally built a great civilization on Sobia, the planet, Athme, the continent that the book's set on. Where did they come? Like, what happened to them? And the idea became that the summoners were almost immortal, and they had this ability to summon and kind of meld with these Empyreans, which were beings that live within a psi, which is the magic, around the Eye of Eternity, which is both the center of the universe and also a nebula that you can see from the planet, that looks like 2 twisting snakes twisted together, which is reflected in the Cadernius. And some of those summoners fell prey to the temptation from Desmata, which is the opposite to Asai, and is the energy that comes from the void. And in the void in Asai there are 10 elder gods that created the universe and everything, and are elemental in power, and their opposite are the Desmadrians, who are 10 demonic gods that live in the void. And one of those gods, Dashana, reached out and offered immortality and more power to those who would worship her. So a bit like the Forsaken, and a group of Sharon, the summoners, took her up on that offer. They stopped using Asai, started using Desmata, and started summoning demon armies. And the other summoners fought against them, and by the end of the that fight, summoners were basically dead, and the world was broken, and lots of prophecies then floated around. But that's where all of that that was very long-winded. But the story originally came from, or the spark for the story came from a piece of art that I had seen that Larry Elmore did, and that's where I finally got a story, and I built it from there.
And hey, no worries on having long-winded answers. That's where we chatted before. And I'm like, I specifically kept a lot of the topics that I want to specifically talk about a little bit vague, just so that we can branch off from there, because there's a lot to talk about. And I mean, with everything there too, just I could just sit and listen to you talk about lore like all night. I mean, I honestly could. And it's one of the things I absolutely love. And it's, comes from, with like the Wheel of Time, one of my favorite things about the Wheel of Time is the world building. It's how it feels like there is so much depth and things feel so real, because there's not just like, oh, this is what's happening, but you have history, you have different cultures, civilizations, different kinds of this, that, the other thing, everything. And it's just, there's so much to dig into. And then I feel like in Blood of the Spear, even in one book, it's just, there's so much there to the world, and there's so many like complex ideas that are being explored, and it immediately does make a world just feel that much deeper, versus just, here's the story and here we go, and like, oh, this is what happened in the past fairly briefly. Sometimes there'll be a little bit, but the sheer degree of just focus, and like a lot of that too that you were talking about too, it's not like you're just going to read and like get lore dumps in the book all note either. It's just, there's a lot of that stuff that's kind of there behind the scenes. You find out as you go. And it's handled well. Do you have any tips for how to get that kind of lore and get that world building in without just info dumping?
Well, for me, it became the stage that the story was set on. So it was relevant for me in one, I love that sort of stuff. Two, it impacts everything that is the world that these characters are playing in. And obviously it starts off very classic fantasy, typical. You start off with these country bumpkins, so to speak, who aren't in the major cities, or they're off in the side country and they have their own thing going on. And then as they travel through the world, the readers get to see more and more, because you're experiencing it through the eyes of the characters. I'm a big player of World of Warcraft, have been for like since vanilla. And I love WoW, and I love the story and all the lore that goes on in there. And I've been a big fan of Chris Metzen, who was the creative director for many years. He left and has come back as a consultant or something. But I saw an interview that he did once, or listened to an interview, and somebody asked about the lore and like, how do you do your stories when you're focusing on an expansion? And he said they would consider it kind of like a triangle. So you'd have your top point where was the crux of the story and everything that was going on here, but the other points you'd need to remember what was going on in other parts of the world, because the world was a living, breathing thing. It had history, it had depth, and they would always be thinking about the stuff that was going on in these other parts, and it would kind of bleed through across all aspects. And then the next expansion, the triangle could flip, and one of those other parts would be at the top, and you wouldn't be going into it cold, because some of it would have bled through into what you were currently doing, and then it would feel like a natural progression to all of a sudden, you've resolved whatever you need to resolve at this end. There's all this other stuff going on and kind of moves around. So I kind of think of it a little bit like that when I'm going on. It's like, all right, well, we're moving from, I don't know, Glass Bay, which is a place that they visit, and then we're going to arrive in Tremor at Sajat. Like, well, what is Sajat? Sajat is like the oldest remaining city on the continent that survived the Sundering. It's a hodgepodge of cultures, and it's massive and cosmopolitan. And well, what are the things that you would expect to see in this massive trading post? Well, it's not a trading post, but it's a capital. It's a really big one, and it's on the Gold Sea as well. So you start throwing stuff in. as it goes by, and note it down so you remember what you talked about, because it will impact things later. And there are things mentioned, that they see, as the characters see as they're making their way through the city, that will be relevant in book 2. um, Culturally, stuff like that. So you mentioned places, and some people say, oh, a fantasy map. It's like, yeah, you got to make sure you visit every place on the map, and we won't in this series, but that's also how the world comes alive for me when I'm looking at a map, and I'll look at Highgate and I'll be like, oh yeah, I know exactly what Highgate is like, what it looks like, what's happening there. I don't know all the details of their history, but I know the top level stuff, and from there I can just riff off that idea and build stuff in. And then once you have a framework for like how the magic system works, and how the gods, what they do and what they don't do, and various factions, because there are 10 gods across 5 spheres of influence, so spirit, earth, air, water, fire. And I have like spreadsheets of like, right, well, this god does this and this god does that, and then this, and then you're like, well, gods have followers. They have, some knightly orders behind them, or the elder gods are quite renowned for not answering or directly communicating with anything or anyone, but they have messengers who do on their behalf. And the priests or the religion, they don't have massive religion that follows them. They have adepts that worship at little shrines and things like that, who align themselves to those energies, and can offer advice or the like to people. But there are another lot that have come up since the Sundering, who are the Sholmas, who call themselves divine messengers of the gods, and they have religions around them and priests, and they speak and interfere in human lives and things like that. So we have different layers. So I kind of forgot what the original question was, so I went on this tangent. But world building, it's all in my head, and where it's not, I do have spreadsheets of stuff where I put notes and remember all the things. And I do have to refer to my spreadsheets. I have to refer to character lists as well. I'll be like, oh, what did I call that character?
I imagine you would have to with just like kind of the way your mind works, which is that's
Yeah.
what I mean. Like the whole idea of world building into and like the description, and you just getting lost in the world building, even just talking about it. It's great because you
Yeah.
talking about how that was just what you did, and like that's where your basis is. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, just the level of detail there, and like you talked about too, if like you don't have to visit the whole map, but you also like if you have this gigantic map and you never reference or like do anything like that, it some people just feel like they're supposed to have one, or some people will do just a tiny map that like here's the actual important parts. But
Yeah.
especially for world building, I've always found it really nice because even if we're not going to go to city way over here, maybe at some point there's a reference to it. Maybe it's a trade good that comes from there, or a little factoid that's relevant for some reason. I mean, there's still things that definitely do make the world feel bigger. So
Yeah.
some really interesting stuff there. We've got there's been a lot of chat, so I'll take a look at the chat here. So Jane says so much happened. It's so fast paced. So that's actually something I was going to bring up too. I just say I'm going to look at the chat, and already this
Yeah.
is a good segue. But so because, and I know you mentioned like some of the earlier influences, like Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms, that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
as well as Robert Jordan with The Wheel of Time, and Janie Wirtz and like Wars of Light Shadow and her other work. But despite having a lot of heavy influence from some of those that are quite slow paced, your book is very fast paced. And so I was wondering, was that intentional? Were you going for a fast paced, or is that just kind of how it happened?
I think it kind of happened when I was writing I work best in 30-minute sprints when I'm doing the first draft. Anything longer than that, and I get antsy, and I can't focus. So I would break my writing time into 5 30-minute sprints a day. And I found when I was writing, I got this feeling of momentum building in the story, and that I had to just keep going. Like, what happens next? What happens next? What happens next? So I did, in the original the original finished draft, the book was at 204,000 words, and by the time I finished working with my doing my rewrites and then working with another editor, so I had like 3 editors that I worked on over the course of developing, and then copy editing and proofing and all that. We got it down to 173,000 words. So the original first 10 chapters of the book got cut to 5. They got rearranged. Oh, and a new chapter was created, because originally the Kyle's trial for the Casterians was referenced as off screen, something that happened off screen before the start of the book. And then I was like, nah, I kind of need to bring that in. I think let's not, have it happen off the page. Let's experience what happened. And it was also a good place for me to start talking about demons. And I think it was part of it that it was just that I had, because one of my editors mentioned that as well. She was like, it's really fast paced, and like normally you have an ebb and flow in the writing of the work, but my ebb was taking the time to describe the places that they were visiting, and throwing in bits of lore here and there. She did, and she's a very well-renowned editor, AJ Spedding. She suggested a number of cuts that took out info dumping. And I took them out. My first novel, I'm still learning. Go with suggestions from people that you hire, that you trust. Obviously, at the end of the day, it's your book and you should do what you want, but I'm totally open to the fact that I'm learning my craft still, so I'll listen to other voices as well. And I took a number of the suggestions of cuts out. When reading over it, I saw it didn't really affect what was going on, and as long as I could put little references to greater things in some areas, that was fine. I'm thinking that I know in book 2 that more info dumping will be happening as a matter of course, because basically the world explodes again. So like you get to book 2 and there's like so much more going on, and more factions come into it. Book 2 is probably going to be slower paced. Also, in book 1, the group of characters you're following are all together through the entire book, pretty much, till like maybe the last 70%, when Meg has her own adventure. But by the end, everyone, well, they've all kind of split up to a degree. So in book 2, you're going to be following different characters. The characters they're not together. They're at different places. They're experiencing different things, and the world's going to expand accordingly because of that. So I'll have to slow things down, and I'm finding that a little bit difficult at the moment, because when I started writing book 2, I was okay, this chapter is this person, chapter 2 we'll go and talk about this person, chapter 3 we'll go back here, and I found I was losing the momentum of the threads for each one, so I was stopping and starting. Now I'm focusing on one character at a time, one thread, and might have other characters with them, and
Gotcha.
I'm finding that a little bit easier. So at the moment I'm focusing on Meg's chapters for this book, which will be one thread, and then I can go back and focus on Kyle, which will be one thread, or Savani, Simeon, will be for the most part traveling with Kyle, so he'll be intertwined with Kyle's story. Darian and Andraste have their own stuff going on and things like that. So yeah, I'll be focusing on one at a time and then working out how to interweave them in between in all the chapters together afterwards.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny how that can work though. Where you're like, I want to find out what happens next, or I want to keep going with these characters, and that just
Yeah.
naturally makes it faster paced. But yeah, I was expecting this to be a very much a slow burn, just from things I'd heard about it and kind of knowing some of the inspirations. And so I even like in my review, I made a joke. I'm like, do you like classic style fantasy, but wish it would get to the point quicker? Like, check out Blood of the Spear.
Yeah.
I know I sold at least one person on it because they're like, okay, yes,
Yeah.
I love that. And it's there's definitely a time and a place for it. But it reminds me too, David Gemmell had a quote for, I think it was Waylander, where the reason he wrote that book is because he was teaching a class and he was talking about pacing. Now it's really important to not start a book off too quickly, because then you won't be able to keep up with the pace. And they asked, like, well, what's an example of a line that would be starting it off too fast? And it's the line, they were already torturing the priest when the stranger walked up. And then he's like, oh, that's a good line. I'm going to write that book anyway.
Yeah.
And so it's just, sometimes it works. And
yeah,
I think with, as there's traveling, as we're learning more lore, it doesn't feel like it's like the breakneck, like I need a break type of book, but it just, it flows and moves very, very quickly. So that's especially nice and not something you often get in this kind of story. So it's kind of refreshing, even though I like my slow books, obviously, too.
Yeah,
it's nice
me
to have
too.
something that's
Yeah.
quicker as well.
Yeah. There was a bit of concern in my part from me that those earlier chapters, people weren't getting through them. Some of the earlier readers who had been given a copy to give feedback, and then I just never heard from them again. And I was like, does that mean you didn't like it? You couldn't get through it? You stopped?
Oh no.
So yeah. And I'd had some. So one of the editors that I had worked with simply in terms of feedback was Stephanie Smith, and she had been the commissioning editor for HarperCollins Voyager in Sydney since its inception. So she discovered Sarah Douglas and Jennifer Fallon, Karen Miller, not Tony Shillito. He had actually published prior to working with her, but lots of Australian fantasy writers who've done well overseas. And she gave me lots of good feedback, and I remember one of the things that she said is she felt like chapter 10 was where the story started. So I was like, okay, if I was to go, let's cut the first 10 chapters, there was stuff in those chapters that I had to keep, that I felt that needed to be there to introduce topics, concepts, plot threads. So I was like, what could I afford to get rid of? And what do I need to keep, and how do I need to keep it? So I had already thought in my head, I'd had an idea of how to do it and how to reduce it from 10 to 5. And then when AJ came back to me and she was like, that first 10 chapters, I'm really sorry, Mark, it's such a slog. And I was like, right, okay. Well, I have an idea. So I talked through, we had a conference call, and I talked through my idea with her, and she was like, yeah, no, do it. That sounds great. So I went back and I stripped out the first 10 chapters, reworked them, kept some stuff, discarded other pieces. And it's gotten to the point now where I can't even at a later date, release it with the author's version, because things like those 10 chapters, some of it is like completely different now. So it wouldn't work anymore. Completely different, and yet basically the same. It's really strange, but it's basically the same places, the same events happen. It's just been changed.
Yeah. I'm sure it can be hard to make those cuts sometimes, but it could definitely make a difference, because I've read a fair few books where it's like, does anything start to happen at some point, or like you have to really push because it feels like you're going nowhere. And it might still be interesting, but it's definitely makes you less likely to want to keep going versus something catching your interest right away.
You need something driving the narrative. So I do anyway. So yeah, I did that, and yeah, it was basically a roller coaster of a book. It just it takes off. It's like, when do we stop? Like, something always happens. And it's really difficult for me to see that from the outside because I'm so connected to what I was writing. I can go, yeah, it's fast paced, but to me, it also makes sense. It's like, well, they're on the run and things don't just stop. Things are happening that need to push the story and push them. So the first book, anyway, it was, they were being, they run and they're being chased, and events start to occur that are meant to be moving them in the direction that's needed for future books and for the climax of the story. So yeah, that's how that worked. Book 2 will be slightly different and probably slower paced, although hopefully each individual story will have its own pacing, so they'll all get woven together.
That makes sense. Yeah. Let's check in here because I said I'd look at the chat, and they're all probably calling me a liar, but we got
She
Bryce
is one of mine
agreeing
as
on
well.
words.
And she was very kind to read Blood of the Spear and give me a cover quote for it as well. She's been amazing.
I will say, I see Janny Words blurbing something.
Yeah.
I'm picking up that book 100%. So like, I was already interested, but when I see Janny Words, I'm like, oh, we're really picking this up now.
An epic fantasy smorgasbord.
Which is also like a great quote too. Yeah. So that's great. We have Andrew here. Oh, and he's reading a certain novella.
Woo-hoo!
So
yay. That will take you like a morning, Andrew. You'll literally like sit down and drink your coffee and be done with it.
I was joking with Mark before the show because I'd been meaning to get the Starbinder for like 2 weeks, and then I grab it finally on my Kindle copy, and I'm reading for like 30 minutes, and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have started this so late. I need to go to bed. And then I realized I'm like, I only have like 30 minutes tops left. I'm like, it's so short and so quick, and so it's a really fast one for sure. So. Andrew's apparently just here to cause trouble and be a rabble rouser, but you're reading Starbinder, so you get some points, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Rouse the rabble. Yeah.
Well, he did get in trouble, so there we go. Liam, yes, I really think you would like Blood of the Spear, especially with your kind of stuff. He's huge on Forgotten Realms as a big one, and a lot of like old school sword and sorcery and all that kind of stuff. And I think there's definitely some elements that'll play well with his taste.
Yeah.
I don't know if I know what Spellfire is.
Yes.
Do you know Spellfire?
Yes, I do. So there is a story behind that because that cover inspired a scene in the book, and I was talking to Felix Ortiz, my cover artist, about it, and he's like, well, why don't we do something like that? And I'm like, okay, but I don't want to like rip off I think it's Jeff Easley who did that cover. That he's like, no, it'll be fine. So yeah, there is a Dracolich, a bone drake in my world, Dracolich in Forgotten Realms, and yeah, there is an event.
I just googled it because I wanted to see. Like, I can definitely see that with the kind of the bone dragon, so that's cool. I was going to say, I figured you might know what that was, and not surprising, it's Forgotten Realms and Ed Greenwood, because I know he's a big fan. So that's funny how that
amazing
works out.
world builder, amazing.
I need to get into more of that too, because I've read a lot of Liam's vlog, and it always makes me interested to find out more.
Yeah, my mate Rogers Reeds is big in that too as well.
I gotcha. So we have Jane. No pointed hints of history, descriptions of location, and uncovering the lore. Religion feel infodumpy or overwhelming. Felt fairly subtle to me, but there's
excellent.
Plenty yeah, well, I definitely agree.
Yeah, you can thank my editor AJ for that. She was like, "Get rid of it, take it out."
I mean, that's editors exist for a reason and can definitely be really helpful. And
totally.
It's definitely one of those things too, where I feel like it can be hard, especially when you have all that lore, to not just keep dumping it out, but for narrative, having it flow.
I think it really helped me with Starbinder, because I have, there's all this lore for Starbinder as well. There's a whole ton of history and stuff involved in that. And I couldn't info dump in that story. It needed to stay novella size. It did want to grow. I stopped it. Although there is possibly a standalone novel coming after that that's set much closer to is kind of a sequel to Starbinder and another prequel to Blood of the Spear. But yeah, so that exercise that AJ put me through of pulling out all this massive lore dumping became a thing that helped me, I think, in writing Starbinder, which had originally been the very first piece of writing I ever did for what turned into Blood of the Spear. It was going to be a prologue, and it was written completely differently. It was written first person, not first person. It was omniscient narration, and there was a lot of work that needed to be done to reshape it into the novella that you have today. But that was a lot of fun to do. That was I was surprised at how quickly it came together, considering how much trouble I'm having with the first draft of book 2 at the moment. But
well, that's the question, though.
yes, that is a great question, Andrew. Early or first quarter of next year, maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Okay.
Yep.
That's not too terribly long. So
no, I've
I'm
really got to get myself into gear to get that done.
That's very. I mean, I could never actually sit and write a whole book. So I can completely understand how much work goes into that kind of thing. So
yeah, I mean, I'm not the only one in this position in the field of writing, but when you have a full-time job as well, finding the time. And look, I'm a bit like in the words of Dorothy Parker, I hate writing, but I love having written. And it's the same with George R. R. Martin. First drafting is hard for me. But once I've done it, I love that I've done it. And I love going back and editing it and fixing it and making it more. But first drafting, sometimes I have an editor brain. So my brain's constantly trying to edit my stuff as I'm doing it. And that's really difficult because, like Janny says, it's like, the first draft, well, Terry Pratchett would say that the first draft is the writer telling themselves the story. And I think that's actually very true. And Janny would liken it to letting a hedge grow. And once it's grown, you then go in and prune it. So trying to edit at the same time as you're writing something can be kind of counterintuitive in some ways, because you just want to let it out and get it going.
fair.
And I need to get in the momentum and the flow to keep the story going. And once it's all down there, come back. Yeah, what does that mean? I've got a better idea for this. Yeah.
And I was actually going to ask, because I know you have experience with doing reviewing and doing editing, and just working in the book industry in general, and so it sounds like sometimes it's hard to not edit as you're first drafting. Are there any other ways that's affected your experience writing, whether made things easier, made things harder, like the editing part?
I think the editing part makes it harder for me. When I first wrote Blood of the Spear, the first draft, I hadn't had the same experience editing or redrafting as I have now. So now when I'm going, it's very hard to get back to the brain set of we're not editing, we're just writing, because I'm looking at what I've done, or I'm thinking about what I've just done and I'm redoing it. I got to the end of the current chapter that I'm working on, and I've just had to go back and change stuff around. Number one, it was 3 times as long as any chapter I'd written previously. It was too long. And as I'm going back and trying to pull stuff out, I'm reworking the stuff that I've written there. So to one degree, I'm kind of I got to the end of the chapter and I was like, oh, this is crap. This is just awful, Mark. What's going on? But then as I'm editing it, I can see I'm making it better, and I can see the places where I need to change things to bring an emotional connection, or to make it relevant, or is this going to drive the story forward? And then if I'm putting this here, what does it mean? Oh, that's an idea for something later. Excellent. So all those things that I was worried about not happening are happening as I go back and try to redo it. So I'm like, oh, okay, let's just write the story, Mark, and trust that when you go back, all those things are going to fall into place. It's a really strange feeling, because I didn't have that when I was writing Blood of the Spear the first time. It's only since I've done all the work and learnt more stuff after it that I'm now getting, and I felt it when I was, basically, I had a first draft for Starbinder before I started it. But reading it and then just getting the ideas and the flows and just the points, the beats that I needed to hit just started coming. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is cool. This is easy. Easy. But yeah.
Well, that's really interesting to think about too, where it's just sometimes that is the most important thing, just get the story out and everything. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's something that there's probably a lot of other writers who run into similar things too with that. And so
Yeah.
just kind of getting it out there, going back and see, okay, what can I change? How can I make this better? And that, that might be the first hurdle. And then once you have that done, yeah, maybe things will start to fall in place. So
Yeah.
always
And
interesting having those kind of insights into
yeah.
writing.
And I've just had to accept the fact that I'm a slow writer. I'm not a Ryan Cahill. I can't get 3 books out in a year. I just can't.
Hey, and yeah, it's everybody's pace is different
Yeah,
too,
it
and
is. Yeah.
it can take a while, for sure. Like I said, I used to think when I was younger, I'm like, I'd like to be an author, and then I realized that it's just not a skill set I have. Because like I'll have an
Yeah.
idea, and sometimes I'll be like, okay, I get a little bit, and then I'm just like, nope, this is going nowhere.
Yeah.
And I could never, I'm not dedicated enough to do
Yeah.
it, and so I have so much appreciation and respect for people who stick it out and go through, and whether you're quick or slow at it, it's a lot of work for sure.
Yeah. I found that one of the things when I first started writing Blood of the Spear, I would, and this was in the early chapters, I would keep getting ideas, really good, exciting ideas for a different story, and I would be really, really tempted to just put Blood of the Spear aside and pick that story up instead. But it's always this excitement you get at the start of writing something new or different, because this is going to be different. This is going to be easier. Um, for me, they rarely are easier, but I learned that it was also my brain trying to distract me from the thing that I was finding difficult. So what I started to do is I've got a folder that is full of Word doc pages that I've wrote the ideas that I had in my head down, filed them away, and went back to the chapter that I was writing and just kept pushing myself. And eventually that urge to move to something different stopped. And if the few times that I've ever become stuck or had writer's block, I've found that it's basically, for me, my writer's block is that I'm trying to take the story in a direction it doesn't want to go, and that's where my everything dries up. It just grinds to a halt. So I have previously been 3 or 4 pages into a chapter and like just diced them and started the chapter again from scratch. And once I do that, taking it in a different direction, all of a sudden it starts flowing again. It's like, okay, cool. So that's where, if I ever suffer from writer's block, that's the first thing I look at is like, well, what's going on? Where am I? Where do I think this is heading, and why isn't it moving?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we do have Andrew asking how many books are planned, which actually is a question I had too.
Yeah.
Uh, in this series.
Yes. So we have 7 books planned for the main series. That's not counting any novellas that come along, or standalones that might come before it.
You're not going for the full Wheel of Time 14?
Nah, I don't. Well, who knows what will happen? Let's see how the story grows. That was the whole. Jordan originally planned it to be a trilogy, didn't he? So it just kept growing in the telling. Maybe, but at this stage, no. 7 books.
Actually, 7 books is still pretty long. It's you don't
Yeah,
get a ton of long series anymore, which is nice to see that at least in self pub, I've been seeing more and more people who are planning out these long, elaborate series,
I
and
love long
I miss
series.
that. I
Yeah.
know it's like, I mean,
If
yeah,
it's a
trilogies are
trilogy,
nice,
I'm like, nah.
but
I don't want a
yeah,
trilogy. Give me a long series. I want to find something I love that I can sink my teeth into and be with it for, I don't care how many years it takes. If it's the writing style, the writing is good, the characters are great, the world's amazing, I'm like, I'm there. Give it to me. Take my money.
yeah, and it's just that's why it's like it's not a bad thing necessarily to be a trilogy. Like standalones are nice every now and then, but I've always been a big series reader.
Series,
And
yeah,
so when I find like a book and I'm like, oh, I really like this, and like it's a part of a series and it's part of a long series, I'm like, yes.
yeah,
So
excellent.
I'm definitely definitely one where it works really well for me.
Me too.
So yeah. So Jane asked, do you have a favorite character in Blood of the Spear?
Oh, that's like asking who your favorite child is, isn't it? Um, favorite character? No, look, to be honest, I don't. I think to some degree, there's a bit of me in every one of the characters, I guess, of different aspects of myself. Possibly Darian, if only because I was like, I like to think that I used to what's the word for it? I feel a connection to Rathla Majere and Dragonlance, and Darian's a bit of an analogy or an analog to him. So based on um, some inspiration from Rathla, so maybe Darian, but Kyle also he's got an interesting path ahead of him. So there's some stuff I'm excited to explore for him. Um, yeah, Darian, maybe Meg, Savani even. She's got interesting stuff coming up in book 2 also. So
Are there
to
any other
say that,
characters that are like easier to write or harder to write?
no, once I start, it's all pretty easy. For example, Prince Alisander comes into book 2. In fact, he's chapter 1. And he's not the nicest person in Blood of the Spear. So at first I was like, oh, how are we going to do this? But actually found it really easy. So um, no, it's once I get into their head, it's like I have to make sure I'm writing in their voice and not my own. Like not just me or my thoughts. It's like, what are their characteristics like, all right, so how would they respond to a situation like this? Which, because I'm very much an introvert and, you know, shy and retiring most of the time. Get me one-on-one, I'm fine. So putting them in group situations, I have to make sure they're not responding the way I might respond to a situation. It's like, no, this is where you get to play act and be somebody else and get out there and be in the front of everything that's happening, or say something that there's no way I would ever say. So it's a bit of fun, actually.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's definitely got to be tough to find the right voice here. And I know I've heard you and some other interviews and lots of authors talk about stuff like that, where it's just finding the right voice for the characters and not having everyone just sound
Yeah.
like you. Definitely,
Yeah, I
definitely.
remember Harriet, Robert Jordan's wife and editor, she would say that he would or he mentioned that she wouldn't be able to tell what character he'd been focusing on in one of his writing sessions, because he would take on their physical characteristics. Like he'd come into a room slinking in the corners and whatever, and she's been, oh, you've been writing Pattern Fane. And he's like, how did you know? Or he'd come, waltzing and whistling somewhere. It's like, oh, you're Matt right now, and stuff like that. It's like, it hasn't been like that for me. But I totally get the whole mindset at needing to switch when you're writing from a character's point of view and taking into consideration what are they like, what would they do, how would they respond to something.
Yeah, for sure. And so, and we've talked about a lot too. I feel like, and with a lot of it, a lot of the things I wanted to talk about, we just kind of got there naturally
Yeah.
too, which I figured would happen. There are a couple of like deeper parts I want to talk about too, about the world and the magic and everything. Talking
Sure.
about the world, one thing I want to bring up too, and it says it's something I've heard you mention, and you notice in the book obviously as well, that Blood of the Spear is written into a world where just there's not racism or homophobia or things like that. It's just kind of people just exist and people
Yeah.
aren't that's not part of their world and concern. And I wanted to talk about that briefly just because I always find it interesting going that route versus like obviously some books kind of focus
Yep.
on those elements which are still giving a positive message in a different way. But to me, it's nice to have a world where it just feels natural that people are different, and that's not a problem. So
Yeah.
just interested to hear kind of your thought process around all
Sure. So one of my favorite writers is an Australian, Mark T. Barnes, and he's only had one trilogy published, but I'm had become friends with him, and I've read a lot of his other work that's not yet published. And one of the things he does in that is he personally is a vegetarian. And in his books and his world, whenever he talks about food, meat's never mentioned. So he'll describe elaborate dishes that sound fantastic, but there's no meat anywhere. And it's never whacked over the head with it. It's never stated anywhere that these cultures are vegetarian cultures. It just is, right? It's just meat's never mentioned in dishes. And I happened to notice it. And I felt that the best thing about that was that it wasn't a political stance. It wasn't, you weren't knocked over the head with it for a reason. It was just the way it is. And I was like, one of the other things that I love in Wheel of Time is that there is no racism in Wheel of Time either. It's any type of suspicion or don't like people is based on their nationality as opposed to their race. So the Ilian and Tyr, and you know the tension between those two races and all the then untrustworthy and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, that is kind of number one. That's kind of the world I'd like to live in, where race is not a thing. Like color of your skin is like whatever, and same with sexuality. It's like it just is. I read David Weber's On Harrington series. It's very much like that in his series as well. And the same with sexism. It's like men and women can, both of them could be guards or warriors if they want to be. They can, there's nothing to stop the firstborn being female from inheriting the right to be the next on the throne, or the land of the father, or whatever it is. None of that's a consideration. It's like it's whoever, whatever. Um, it depends entirely on the person whether or not they want it, as opposed to what they're restricted to by cultural norms or color of their skin or what their sexuality is. So I decided to make it like that. I did afterwards realize that in one passage, I was called out by a reviewer for homophobia. And I, for the life of me, couldn't work out where it was in the book. And I thought one of one character gets called a can we swear on this?
I go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, a cocksucker by somebody else. And I'm like, is it that? Is that what it was? Because he was a male who was being called a cocksucker. And then there was another instance where a character was called a pansy, and I thought, well, maybe that's it, because I don't consider that to be a homophobic slur, but I guess probably it is, or maybe that's where it originally came from.
I guess I
But
hadn't thought about it. Could be.
I don't know. So I'm kind of like unsure where that came from, or the fact that it's briefly touched on, because romance isn't the focus of this story, but it was briefly touched on that Meg was very keen on Darian. They'd grown up together and she had feelings for him, but Darian is not into women. And nobody had known that, and nobody cared afterwards. But there was a thing that it was never going to happen in that direction, because it was just like, it's just not his thing. So I don't know if the way that was handled came across as homophobic, but it wasn't meant to.
Yeah.
Um,
I didn't have anything that felt the way, but I mean, perceptions could definitely be different. It is always
Yeah.
interesting though to have something like that where you're like, no, the point is it's not, and it doesn't exist, and then somebody's like, no, this was that. So you never know.
Yeah, and I mean, things will be like that will be explored deeper, and references will be made throughout the rest of the story. It's just, yeah. It was just something that I think my focus was getting them from A to B, and the other stuff happening as they were going along. And it wasn't so those cultural norms didn't really get explored too much. And then I made so my proofreader does a lot of sensitivity reading when when she's proofreading it for me, and she was like, I had called, there is a character later in the book who is Amarian, but she's half Amarian, so she's considered by Amarians to be a half caste, and I was told that's unacceptable to use. So I was like, okay. But it kind of works, and I actually like the sound of the word, and that's how Amarians, who are very prejudiced about people who are not Amarian, because Amarians have blue skin, look at her. So yeah, I don't know. I was also called up for using the word or calling someone a cripple in Starbinder, and that word is simply not acceptable. I'm like, well, it's culturally, it's time and place appropriate in this story, and it's what it is, so I'm keeping it. Sorry.
I think that's one of those things where
Yeah.
it's good to keep things in mind too, and like it is entirely possible that
Yeah, and
maybe
I
you're writing
thought about it a
something.
lot. And I did ask
Yeah,
other people at the time when cripple was brought up to me. I was like, and at the end of the day, I was just like, I'm not. It was meant to be nasty when it was said, right? It was meant to be disparaging. So that felt appropriate to be
yeah.
used. So I kept that.
And there's always the broader conversation too, and it's just because things exist in the world, it's not like that means everything is your point of view. I mean, that's especially in fantasy where you have like different cultures or you have like villains. But like I remember reading something that Brent Weeks had a lot of people that were really mad at Lightbringer because it has slavery. And he's like, I don't
Oh,
endorse slavery. It's
I
not looked
don't
at as a
either.
positive thing,
Yeah,
but it's just like it exists in that world,
it
and
exists in mine as well.
yeah, and I
Um,
mean, it's not saying
and
like, yeah, this is great. It's
yeah,
just it's a real thing that's existed in
yeah,
human history in the past, and it's
yeah.
it's something that if it fits and there's a reason for it in the story, it's even though obviously it's wrong in practice, but
Yeah, I'm
the
not
things like that can
endorsing
be
it.
in
It's a
books.
thing, though. Yeah.
Yeah,
And in book 2, you'll see more of it. So
I
can't
was
wait for
assuming
that.
that from some
Yeah.
things in
For
book one.
the Amarians, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. For sure. Yeah, and it's definitely it's with things like that too. It's there's always a balance, I feel like, and it's where I've read a lot of books, and sometimes it's you get stuff and I'm like, okay, this is actually it's at this point the author it feels like they're actually being offensive to this, that, the other thing.
Mm.
That definitely can happen, but most of the time it's just some things exist, some people have a
Yeah.
problem with it, some don't. Kind of
Yeah.
is what it is.
I'm not trying to appropriate anybody's culture or cultural experiences. I'm taking these things and I am trying to make them not unique, but certainly specific in tone and feel as much as it can be to this world that they're in. And one of the big things with the world building is that humans, including Amarians, because they're an offshoot of Homo sapiens, um, are not native to Sobia. They have come from elsewhere, from a starfaring civilization of humans
Which is
from
also
Earth. Yeah.
I see. I wasn't sure if I was going to bring that up because that was something I kind of wanted to talk about, but I feel like there's only
Yeah.
so much you can talk about there without
Yeah.
going too hard into spoilers. But I
Yeah.
love that idea in fantasy, and that's something too I've seen in some like Wertz's work as
Yeah.
well. And it's
Yeah.
just such an interesting thing and like little wrinkle. And even if
Yeah.
you don't explore it like extensively, it just that like even as an idea, that
Mm.
just little offshoot, it just gets you thinking, gets the
Yeah.
mind working
Well,
and going.
at this
So
point in the story, the only faction that really knows that, like as in actively think about it, The Shalloway Starbinders. Yeah. So like Soralis would know it as a historical fact, but it's like so irrelevant it doesn't mean anything. But the Shalloway, it's like that's a big thing for the Shalloway. That there is an entire basis of technology that has been lost or to humans on this planet. Yeah, because their magic is kind of technologically based. It uses quantum mechanics and reflections of a psi as opposed to wielding a psi like the Soralis do, which becomes a bit more mystical because it links into the fact that the Siren, who had the ability to summon Empyreans, learnt from them the language of creation and could like see. It's a bit like the Matrix and that rain of like of numerals and whatever,
The code,
but
don't
in,
you?
yeah, code, but in rune form. Is the language of creation. They could see it and they could read it and they could change the basis of reality. Soralis can't see that. They don't have the connection to the Empyreans that the summoners did, but from the summoners' teachings, they know what runes are and they can learn them and then affect things around them and create spells or cants and throw balls of fire or create walls of force fields and things and do healing stuff. They can't do it to the same degree that the summoners could. Whereas the Shalloway's magic system is based on technology and quantum mechanics and changing things like that, throwing energy around. And then you've got the witches or the keepers, the covenants, and they use a reflection of the light of the Psi. So the light of the Psi is on everything, and they can perceive the light of the Psi, and they use the reflection of that light in the world to weave stuff. They don't know the runes either, so their magic is also considered less powerful because it's not changing the base of reality. It's affecting stuff around them.
It's like you just knew what the next thing I was going to ask you about was, which was the
Well, I
magic
felt
system.
like, I felt like this is a natural. Let's just roll into the magic.
It was perfect because those were specifically some things that I was going to talk about. And Andrew, I promise I'll get to your question in a minute, but we naturally segued there. But yeah, so that was one of the things that I just found so fascinating is we have these different like factions and orders of magic users, and it's not like they're all kind of using the same base of magic, but it's all different. We have the summoners from the past, they did something really different. And then we have the Soralis and the Shalloway, which I hope I'm saying these things correctly. I was listening to you say them and trying to make sure, because I haven't said Kyle's name out loud yet, because I figured I would mispronounce it, because I pronounced it differently in my head reading it originally.
Any way you like is fine. Yes.
Oh yeah, but yeah, so I mean having that and the comment too about like things not being gendered with like what you're doing necessarily, because like Soralis can be male or female, the Shalloway can be male or female, and it's not like, oh, this is the men magic users, the female magic users, and witches, you're not necessarily male or female, it's just a different branch of magic. And so like that, and I don't know if there was any intentionalness to it, but it always makes me think of Equal Rights, the Discworld book, Terry Pratchett, just because that like purposely overanalyzed all of the different titles of magic users.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Wheel of Time, a massive fan of Wheel of Time and the Aes Sedai, and the majority of Aes Sedai for reasons are obviously female. And I'm like, well, I can't do that. I can't do that again. It's just too much. It's too close. And even, look, the Shalloway have a massive inspiration on the Coriani from Walls of Light, Janny's Walls of Light and Shadow. So the majority of the Shalloway are female. But there are some males as well, and it's comes from the things. I'm not going to go into too much depth, but in their initiation process, a lot of the men don't survive it, but females do. So that's the simple place. There are some men who do, and most of the seers or people who are born with the ability with sight are female for some reason. The same thing with Asai. The males and females perceive the color of the light of the eye differently. So females will see it as gold, and men generally see it as silver. And I think I stuffed up in Blood of the Spear in some of my references to that, but moving forward, it will be fixed
I gotcha.
appropriate. But and there's no, it's the same energy. It's kind of like not known. Well, it's not known by the Seralis why. And it may never be talked about in the actual book, but it's a thing. It just is. It's the same energy. It's just perceived differently by the sexes, but it does the same thing. Yeah.
My wheels are turning now.
Okay. The other thing with the Seralis as well is they're generally restricted to utilizing the energy of the sphere that they are attuned to. Now, it's a little bit like what star sign are you born in? Is you're always going to be that star sign. So people are born with a natural affinity for one of the 5 spheres, and the Seralis focus on that to their detriment, and believe that you can only have one. You can only be or use the energy of one sphere. Put all together, like when you spin a wheel of colors and they all become one thing. Yeah, if you travel deeper, and the difference was that the Siren aren't constrained to one sphere of energy.
Yeah. It's just and it's once again, it's just like I feel like too something that just shows how much like depth and thought has gone into the book. It doesn't really any topic we're talking about, just you have so much just like there already ready, and I absolutely love it. And that's another reason why I was so excited to do this, just to kind of talk, just hear you talk through all these different pieces.
I was saying to Mum that I'm doing this morning. She's like, "Oh, are you nervous?" I'm like, "No, not really." I said, "Look, I'm a subject matter expert here, so any of his questions he wants to ask me, that's fine."
I feel like I could try to come up with like the most complex random question, and you'd be like, "Oh, I had that in this spreadsheet. I thought about that a year ago." It's just,
and look, some things I don't have in depth, but I have a lot of stuff that like I can go to and like, all right, well, let's have a look at this. What have I said it is? All right, now let's dive into that and let's extrapolate and build on it, because I do have a lot of factions and names of things and places and in different realms across the map, but they're just waiting to be unpacked. I haven't unpacked them. I've just gone, yep, bang, it's this. Put that here, and it becomes like a flag for me in my head. Like, this is the name of the box. Let's open the box, then I'll start pulling stuff out of it.
Yeah. Well, and I do still have we've gotten through most things here that I specifically wanted to talk about. A couple more things here, but first, and I think Andrew, he's been off and on. It sounds.
Is he still here?
He may have left. I think he had to run back. This was his last message. So,
okay.
And we had earlier. So he's been off and on, but it sounds like he's gonna watch replay after. But he wanted to know.
All right.
Do you have a Wheel of Time hot take that you can share?
A hot take? I'm sorry, I don't know what.
Like something like controversial or surprising. That's an opinion that you have. Basically.
I hate the television show.
Well, that just means you have good taste, Mark. I mean, I guess it may be controversial, but yeah, I couldn't finish it. So
no, and I'm not going to go. I'm not watching anymore. I watched the first season with utter despair and horror, and I had joined all of these Facebook groups about We Hate the Wheel of Time TV show and Wheel of Time, not our Wheel of Time, and all this sort of stuff, and just to talk about the actual books and the stuff. But then they started bringing in, their outrage about the things they've heard that's going to happen in the next season, where they're going to go, and I'm just like, I don't even want to know anymore. So I've left all those groups. I'm just like, nothing. I don't want to know anything about it. No, I don't think I have a hot take for the books. I loved it all. I didn't, and I didn't think that. I think that. God, can I say this? I think Brandon Sanderson's books only worked for me because I had spent so many years having read Jordan's work and his characters were alive in my head already. So I had those voices in my head when I picked up Sanderson's books. And while he did a fine job and I'm glad he finished it, I don't enjoy those books as much as I did Jordan's writing. And I hate this, that Sanderson had the opportunity to put his own twist on weaving with that. Was it a talent that one of the Ashermen had where he could open the
Oh,
portals?
and draw
And he
with
was, yeah, and he
traveling.
was dropping lava and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's too Sanderson. I'm sorry, no.
That
Jordan
that
would
was
never have had
definitely
that.
a little more of a Sandersonism. Fair enough. So
Yeah.
that's another one too. I feel like
Probably
there's
that's my most controversial opinions, I think, of all the time, I guess.
I gotcha. As long as
I
you,
do.
I mean, like, if you said your favorite character was Goblin or something, that would
Oh,
trigger a lot of people, I'm sure. But
I thought he was
it,
fine until the end.
I never hated him like as much as some
I did
people do.
hate
He's
that
just kind of
that
insufferable.
he led the young bulls, what are they called? That he
The
turned,
younglings.
yeah, and yeah, the younglings, and that he'd killed his teacher.
Mm,
I
gotcha.
really, that outraged me actually, that had happened. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's all fresh for me. I'm doing a reread right now. I'm actually on
I'm currently
Tarzan this month.
rereading as well. I've been the last
Oh
couple
yeah.
of years, all my rereads have been audio. But this is for the
Hey,
first
that's what I'm
time.
doing this time.
Yeah, I'm rereading the actual books. Like I'm reading the physical book as with Chris from a fictional escapist as he's doing it for the first time. So, and then we're also
Oh,
starting
okay.
well, for me, a reread of Malazan. Um, I'm doing it with him and Roger, who are reading for the first time, but I haven't reread at least the later books of Malazan since they first came out. The early ones I reread a couple of times up until I want to say, is it Bone Hunters? Is that the name of one of the books? Not book
That's
6 or
one of
something? Yeah,
do
yeah.
that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Book 5, yeah. So I
I think.
reread
Well,
the first
I
5
think it is
books.
6.
Yeah, yeah, 6. Yeah, I'd reread the first 6 books, but after that, I've only read them once, so I'm going to reread them all with them
Yeah, I used to reread Wheel of Time like annually for
constantly,
a while, and
constantly.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
I always did physical, and I've only recently discovered
yeah,
audio within like the last year or two, and it's been really nice.
yeah. Yeah, so I lost a lot of my reading time and writing time when I changed jobs and I now drive to work. So I'm in the car for like an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes twice a day. And I was like, okay, give me audio. So the first ones I jumped to were Wheel of Time. And it's like I've listened to those and all of them and numerous times now. So this time around, the reread's going to be physical books. Or
Nice.
ebook.
I
Yeah,
I do need to reread Malison at some point
yeah,
as well. I've only read through one time, and I feel like I will appreciate it a lot more on the second time through.
yeah, yeah,
But it's been
totally.
many years, so definitely one to get back with. But so I figured I'd do the question for whenever Andrew did come back, even
Okay.
though it was kind of random. But the one other thing I figured we should, and probably should have done this earlier on, but I was
Mhm.
so eager to get to talking about your book, and so no regrets. But I figured I should talk a little bit about the self pub process because
Uh-huh.
I know that's something too people, whether readers or other authors are really interested to hear about. And I
Yeah,
know it's something I've seen in some other interviews you've done where you've talked a little bit about like the cover and stuff like that. And we've had some mentions too. You talked about your editors and everything, but I
yeah,
know you mentioned a big part of it for you was finding the confidence to even believe you could do it as well. And so
yeah.
kind of just looking at self-pub process, what you went through, things you learned,
Sure.
and anything like that.
Yeah, so originally I wanted to traditionally publish, um, but Wheel of Time, The Blood of the Spear had taken me so long to write that I realized I needed to find an agent, and then the agent needed to find a publisher that would want to take on the work. So that could be years still from the time I'd finished. I had reached out to a couple of agents, and I heard back from them saying they liked what they'd read, but it wasn't for them. That wasn't what they were looking for. So I decided, you know what, I'll do self-publish, because the self-published fantasy blog off had been going for a number of years. It was I was seeing more and more activity in the community, people talking about it, and promoting and engaging with the authors of these books, and supporting them. So I was like, this, and also traditional publishers publishing the things I want to read less and less. I'm not finding the stuff I like in traditional publishing houses or in bookshops. I'm finding it in Amazon, on ebooks from recommendations in the indie publishing community. So I decided I'd do it. So I got my own editor. I'd obviously been working with my editors before I decided to self-publish. I remember I'd done a lot of research and spoken to people like Mitchell Hogan, who's an Aussie self-published author. He's kind of a bit hybrid, does a bit of traditional and self-published. And I remember an interview with him where he said, like, the goal is to make your self-published book indistinguishable from a traditionally published one. So, and one of the big things with that was making sure you have it edited properly. But then that led to me to be like, well, that's also layout, right? So, I've been reading for years. I sell books. I know how a book, when you open the book up, and I know how it's formatted, and where the half title page, the full title page, the copyright page, all the stuff that's there, all of that, how it gets laid out. I don't have a layout program. I do now. I didn't at the time, and I don't use Mac, so I don't have Vellum. So I have a friend who has also self-published, and she works as an editor and a formatter. So I hired her to do the formatting for for both the original EPUB file and the book file for Ingram. So I'm published and distributed by Ingram for the physical copies. All the e-copies go through Amazon. So she did all of that for me, and I had to learn about margins and things of that nature in self-publishing physical books. Luckily, finding someone like Felix, who has become one of the more popular artists in the self-published for self-published fantasy books, and Sean T. King as a cover designer. So I knew I needed the illustrator, an artist, and a cover designer, and I went for those guys, who are by no means cheap, but their work, I think. In fact, none of what I did was cheap. Like, the editing process cost me a fortune. The art and the design, it costs as well, but you get what you pay for, right? I think they've done a pretty fantastic job.
I definitely agree. I think it's one of the things where, and it's like, obviously not everybody can, has the money to spend for that. And, I've read
and
seen
saved
some
and
of their
saved.
bones. Yeah. It's not going to be easy, but you look at your book, and if you just saw this in a bookstore, you wouldn't assume it was self-published or anything. It's there, the margins, everything, the design, it just is extremely professional. And I've read some, and like I've seen some books too where I'm like, it was a pretty good book, but like the formatting or like the line spacing or things like that were just really bad. It's really distracting, even if the book itself isn't bad. And it's just things like that, I think, do make a difference for sure.
Or Pro Writing Aid was used as the editor. which is fine when you're doing it yourself before you send it to an editor, in my opinion. I'm not an editor. I do need an editor to go over my work, and I will always hire a physical editor, like a real person, to look at. I think that's not something that it's a non-negotiable for me. I have to do it. I don't want to put out a book. And look, that being said, there are still typos. There are the occasional typos and stuff that get through. There always are. And every time you change one thing, 10 typos come into it. So you do your best. But the good thing is, like, I can read Wheel of Time and you can come across typos in that. So it's like, well, even the biggest books out there don't escape all of that. So I don't think it's as big a problem as it used to be, but sometimes you come across stuff and it's just like, oh, what? No, can't do this. Yeah.
I have seen some like that before,
Yeah.
and actually, so there was a book, and it was formatting wise, it was probably like the worst formatted book I've ever read,
Yeah.
and it was something an author had sent, and it's just like cover was really blurry, the spacing was like 8 or something. I don't know, it was ridiculous. Like if there was dialogue, you're getting like 5 lines on a page or something. It was crazy. And like, so I look at this and I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be terrible. And it wasn't. And it was, apparently they did editing themselves too. And it was it was extremely well edited.
Yeah.
That was great. But all the other stuff, like, still needed some help here.
Yeah.
And so it's like, some people can do certain parts and whatnot, but it's also, I mean, I think there's something to be said for, when you find people who are really great at it, it can definitely
one of my pet peeves in ebooks in formatting is where there is a space between paragraphs. I'm just like, it drives me mental. I'm like, and I had a friend who had somebody put together, format his book for him, and they'd done that. And I was like, why, what's that there? It's like, I went nuts. And he's like, oh, she told me that it's the in thing. That's what everyone does. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. Traditional publishers don't do it. It has to look like a traditionally published book, or I'm not picking it up. No.
Well, sometimes you get the ones where they haven't been formatted properly. See, like you get page numbers like that should be on the bottom in like the middle of a page or something.
Oh,
too.
yeah.
I've done something like that, and I'm just like, it's like I get too that it's, and I try not to like let things like that detract from the story too. But it's just like things like that can be distracting, and
no,
I do think too,
they are distracting for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's when you make your book, whether it's self-pub, traditional published, you're just wanting to make it as nice and professional seeming as possible. And
yeah, totally.
It's just I mean, you can tell you put a lot of work into this. That's the first thing that just stands out about this is it looks great. There's a lot of attention to detail with how it's designed, how it's set up, and it's immediately it's the kind of book you see and you're like, okay, I want to pick that up. It's just looks cool.
Excellent.
So yeah, 100%.
And then we went back and did the cover, the chapter icons as well. So I didn't have that originally.
I love chapter icons too, which is something too, which I think we talked about actually, where like chapter icons, and this is just a completely random one, but chapter icons and actual chapter titles, I miss those. You don't see that in a lot of books anymore. It's just like chapter 1, or it's like the character.
They are hard. They are hard.
I can see it.
I'm like, oh my God, what have I set myself up for? I've got to come up with chapter names. And sometimes it's like, I've got nothing. I don't know. Like even Jordan, half the time his wife came up with the names of the chapters.
I was going to say, it's apparently Harriet pretty much did the chapter titles.
Yeah. I'm like, I need somebody else doing that. And I had originally in an early draft, I had epigraphs at the beginning of each chapter. And writing those was difficult too. So I have like 40 epigraphs that didn't get put into the book because I took them out. But if I had put them in the book and then had to continue doing them moving forward, that would have just been like a bit of a nightmare. But I really like the idea of them.
Yeah.
I was told as well by one of my editors that I hadn't done them correctly because they didn't all match the theme. I thought they did, but they felt they didn't match the theme of the chapter that they were above. And I'm like, really? Is that a thing? I didn't even know that it was a thing. But I would try and think of a particular.
Can be.
Yeah, I didn't know. I thought that I thought they fit, but apparently they didn't. Maybe I'll do Instagram posts or something with the. I have put some of the epigraphs up on Instagram posts before. Maybe I'll do something like that. So this
There you
was
go.
the epigraph for chapter whatever.
That is one of those things too. I can imagine that being difficult, and it is something I like, and it's in some cases become a bit more popular because like Sanderson is big on epigraphs, and so I know a lot
Yeah,
of people have tried to use them because of him too. But
yeah,
it's one of those things I like, but it does need to pertain to it somewhat. I mean,
yeah,
because if you're just doing something random and it has nothing to do with it,
yeah,
then it's like, what's the point?
yeah.
But I mean, as
I've
long as
just
it
been
serves a
reading
purpose.
I've just been reading a book that's got them in there, and I feel like it's just there to increase the world building. I'm like, okay,
It's at least doing
yeah,
something. But yeah, I've seen
yeah,
some like that for sure, where I'm like, this seems a little random, but it's a little
yeah,
tidbit, and so it definitely, I think it just depends, and it's one of
yeah,
those things. It's funny that you mentioned it though, because it's something that some people do just because they like the style of having it, but don't
yeah,
think about how actually hard it is to come up with relevant
yeah. It is hard.
epigraphs like that.
Yeah,
So especially for every single chapter and relating, like that's
yeah,
even for a really short thing, it feels like they're doing a
yeah.
lot of
So say I'm doing 40 chapters over 7 books. It's like no, and each one of them has to have an epigraph. No, that was yeah. Let's forget that.
That's fair. That's fair. I was just saying you got a lot of the other nice things in the book,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'll
Well, that
figure
being
that
said, I'll need to think of some new chapter icons moving forward as well, because there'll be, I mean, we'll reuse a lot of them, but there'll be some chapters that none of those icons I currently have are relevant for. So I'll have to come up with new ones for that. And those were interesting to come up with.
yeah. It's yeah, that's another thing too, where and it's I feel like a lot of little things like that with like chapter icons, chapter titles just comes from me reading the Wheel of Time so many times.
I loved it.
It's
It was
a
one of the things that like jumped out at me when I was reading the book for the first time. I'm like, oh, these are amazing. All books should have them.
yes.
But
That was
all
like
books should have
I
them
feel
well.
kindred
Not all of them
spirits.
are, yeah, all books should have them done well. Not all of them are done well, unfortunately. Like, I don't like the chapter icons in the Stormlight Archive books. I love the
Oh,
Stormlight
really?
Archive books. I do not like the chapter icons for them. No, I do not at all. And that
It depends.
stupid, like, arch that has over the chapter number, I'm just like, get rid of that.
I actually like those. The
All right.
icons themselves, I feel like they've gotten a little
It's
hit or
too
miss. Some of them
much.
are cool,
Yeah.
some not. But
Yeah.
yeah, that one I think was him
The
going
icons
all
aren't
out
too
with the
bad.
stylism.
It's the arch over the chapter numbers or whatever that I don't like. I'm just like, no, get rid of that. That's too much.
Fair enough. Fair
I
enough.
have I have a lot of opinions
I
that
have
I
all
don't
good. So,
always express publicly.
I mean, we are live,
I
but like
know,
I
so
don't
I should
care.
stop. It's going to be on YouTube forever. It's
We're almost an hour and 40 minutes in, so I
yeah.
don't know how many people we have
We'll
sticking around
actually
with us at this point.
yes, sit
But
through it.
so,
Come back and watch it later. Put
let
it on in
all
the
of the
background. Yeah.
controversial opinions out. But that's what because Andrew commented he was here for chaos. He likes to when I'm on a live show with him call me out on things he knows that are going to get me in trouble for opinions
Right.
I have like on certain books and whatnot. And we'll be doing it, and like the other people there will be like, and I'm like,
What do you mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
the
And
only
so
Sanderson books I like are the Stormlight Archive. So controversy.
I've been kind of so I started reading him right when it was announced he was going to take over Wheel of Time, and Warbreaker was his new book. Then I read that, my God, it's pretty good. And I read Mistborn and I liked it, so I started reading his stuff. And then like Stormlight are the ones which, and I can see from like knowing the kind of stuff that you like to read, that's the one where like we're really building out a lot more. So that's more your kind of style. Whereas the
Yeah.
others don't quite go to that length. But like I've been like some of his other stuff has been pretty hit or miss for me.
Yeah.
And so I'm still like I mean most of his books are behind me right now, but it's yeah I mean I get completely why some people are not a fan of his at all. And I get why some people love him, and white people are sometimes in the middle too. So we Derek's still with us.
Oh, yay, Derek!
Man,
thank you.
he doesn't like the arches
Yes,
either.
thank
Come
you.
on.
Yeah, no. They're garbage. Get rid of them.
That just gets me. I didn't even realize that was a controversy, and I love it.
It's a controversy for me. That's an opinion. That's all.
Oh my gosh!
Thank God you can't see them when you're listening to the ebook.
I was gonna say, well, Mark, if you don't like the chapter icons, I probably should have.
No, the actual icons aren't too bad. I don't like all of them, but there are some that I really like. I especially like that one that is like a whole heap of tentacles coming out, like
for like
of a circle.
Lightweaver chapter.
Yeah.
Listen, maybe I'll have to get this.
Yeah,
I still need to get.
totally.
I need to get.
I'll send you a JPEG.
Oh. It's definitely going on the list here. That's the only one I have, and it should have been. And for years I said it was going to be the Great Serpent, and like that chapter icon. But I didn't want to get that on the arm, and I was told this is the best place to get a first tattoo. And so I'm like, okay, we'll get that.
My
that
tattoos were the Chinese dragon on that arm, and hold on, Celtic dragon on that arm. Can't really say it. I can't get my.
It's a kind of.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I legitimately did not notice you had arm tattoos.
Well, no, that's because they're on the inside of my arm. So
I gotcha. Okay, that's super cool. Yeah.
Too. Yeah.
So we got you usually read some on audio.
Yeah, well, that's the good thing about audio. You don't see them.
I have not. So I did a reread of Era 2 on audio, and it was the first time I've ever not liked Michael Kramer. And I got used to it, but I usually like him a lot.
I didn't like him when I first started listening to The Wheel of Time. I think it takes about maybe halfway through Eye of the World before he warms into it. Before then, he sounds to me monotone and very dry. As soon as Kate came in, it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, I'll listen to anything that woman reads. Yeah, she's amazing. And then so I don't know if it's a matter of I got used to him or he warmed up into it. But I haven't disliked him since. I can certainly listen to him. And I did for the first and second book of the Lacanius trilogy by James.
Oh, he does those?
I want to say Islington, but I think some people say Islington.
I've always said Islington, but everyone says Islington, so I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's proper English. It's Islington, but whatever. I
think he's Australian.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, the third book I couldn't get into, so I haven't read the third book yet. I might have to go back and try and physically read it. We'll see.
Yeah. It can vary because, and I know that, Michael Kramer, Kate Redding, that's a whole apparently very controversial because some people love him, some people love one, hate the other, and some people hate them both, and there's a really wide variety of opinions there. But I have only heard her on Wheel of Time, I think.
Okay. I picked up. It's really funny. So I picked up because I read them originally physically, and then I was like, oh, these are available on audio. I'll get them. The Codex Alera by Jim Butcher. She narrates those.
Okay.
And she's actually English. She lives in America and she's married to Michael Kramer, but she's actually English. And she uses her natural English accent in those books. And I was like, what is going on? Who is this person?
I legitimately didn't know that.
Yeah, it was amazing.
She definitely does an accent in the Wheel of Time books.
Yeah, what annoyed me is when she changed character voices in the later books. And I'm like, particularly for Min, she came this airy line-haired girl voice, and I'm just like, what the that is not how you portrayed Min earlier. I'm like, continuity.
I've noticed too they change the pronunciation of certain names and words over time as well. But like I made a whole
Yeah.
video poking fun at all of the words that I found out I apparently have been mispronouncing for
Right.
half my life when I first did audio and whatnot too. So
Yeah.
it's always fun with pronunciation. So at least most of your names are fairly phonetic, I
Yeah.
feel like,
Yeah, they
which
are.
makes it easier.
Yeah. I do have a pronunciation guide in the glossary, like all of them have. Like the same with Wheel of Time does as well. I did that too. That was fun. Not. I had my proofreader. My proofreader helped me with a lot of that because I was
I
apparently just
gotcha.
doing it wrong.
I wouldn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Apparently, same thing in Stormlight can be a little bit
Have they?
tricky.
Yeah.
I feel
I'm not
that
as
many hours it'd be hard
yeah,
to
it would be.
remember too.
And I'm not as familiar with all of it in Stormlight because I've only done the one read through. And to be honest, they get a little bit too big for me, the books. I love big books. I absolutely love them, but controversial opinion, I think that the Stormlight books could be shorter.
Say it ain't so. That's one of those things where I do feel like most people probably agree. Like I'm okay with the length. It doesn't bother me at all. But I get, they probably almost certainly could be at some point. But
Yeah, I mean, if I come across parts of the story I feel are dragging, I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, this part could have been, is this part necessary?
yeah, no, that's for sure. Say, Derek asked about you having audio. I don't think you do
I
have audio for
don't.
this yet.
I'd have to do it myself, and I've looked into it, but given the word count, I'd be looking at laying out something like 5,000 US to get it narrated by a professional narrator. So
That's
one day
crazy.
I would love it is. One day I would love to do it, and I'm looking at it, but at the moment the money is currently being saved to get the cover art, the cover design, the editing, all of that stuff for book 2. So maybe if my sales take off, hey, sure,
Yeah,
then
I was
totally
just
do it.
saying.
Yeah,
You can ask Andrew D. Meredith is a self-pub author who
yeah,
did his own audio, and he started
yeah.
to like branch into doing it for other people. So I don't know
Uh-huh.
what his pricing is, but yeah,
Yeah.
I imagine audio's got to be
Much
expensive.
like the authors I like, the narrators I like are really specific as well. So like Kate Redding or Michael Kramer, yeah, totally. Either any of those. Nick Podell is probably my favorite narrator. I'd love him to do my work. That would be amazing.
I mean, there's still I'm still fairly new to
Yeah.
audio, and so I've been kind of discovering a lot of
Yeah.
narrators. And like one
Oh.
of my favorites for sci-fi is Ray
Mhm.
Porter.
Okay.
I've been hybrid reading Rune Lords by David Farland, which he
Oh, does
also
he do
does.
that? Yeah. Okay.
He does,
I
but
listened to
it
the
sounds
first book.
so different.
Yeah, yeah. I did have one narrator reach out to me on Twitter very early after publishing Blood of the Spear. He said he'd been reading it and he loved it, and if I ever considered doing audio, would I consider, letting him know so he could audition? And I went to his website and I had a listen to his stuff, and like he used one style of voice for science fiction and a different style for fantasy. And I was kind of like, well, I think I prefer your science fiction style, so I'd ask you to do that for my fantasy books than the style you're
Uh,
doing for fantasy, strangely enough.
it's funny, well, and because Ray Porter did like Project Hail Mary, and he did like the Bobiverse books. I don't know if you've read
I
either
haven't
of
read them.
those, but I don't do as much sci-fi as fantasy myself, but so I really liked him in that, and so I saw he did narrated Rune Lords, and I listened, and
Yeah,
it's like you can still tell it's him, but like the cadence is completely different, and just the vocal style to even character voices for the most part are just incredibly different, and
yeah,
it makes sense because he does kind of more of a conversational tone with sci-fi. Versus he's really telling a story with fantasy, but
yeah,
there's so many things like that too, where it's like, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a skill, and to develop like those different kinds of things, it's
yeah.
definitely not it's not another thing easy. It's so much of that is it's always an interesting process, I'm sure.
But I have a recommendation for you. You like big epic fantasy books. And
Of
series,
course.
yes. So the Patterns of Shadow and Light by Melissa McPhail.
Melissa McPhail. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, they're so
That-
good, and I am devastated that she's gone. She had written most of the sixth book. In fact, she'd written so much that it got split into 6 and 7, and she's given permission to her family to publish what she's done. So her team's going through it. But I'm devastated that she went as well, pancreatic cancer, unfortunately. But she was amazing, and her books are fantastic. You'll love them. Seriously.
I have I remember hearing about that, and I'd heard some people talking because it does. Sephiroth's Hand is the first one, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
100% on my radar, and one
Yeah.
I definitely want to get to because I've heard a lot
Yeah.
of great things about that as
Yeah.
well. It's
Really
just
good.
it's one I need to get to, and that's where like I keep trying to tell myself I can't start any more huge series because I'm trying to
Yeah.
get through Wars of Light and Shadow,
Yeah.
and I can't stop starting series, so that always
Yeah.
always makes it difficult for sure. But
Oh,
that's
okay. Do you binge them?
especially you recommending it adds it even higher on the list.
Yeah,
So.
really good. It was funnily enough, I found it difficult to read her at first. She writes omniscient narration, much like Jani does. And I struggle with omniscient narration at the best of times. But then I went to listen to the audiobook, and Nick Podell does the audiobook, and the audiobook was completely different for me. So listening to the omniscient narration is fine. Reading it, I sometimes struggle until I fall into the rhythm that the writer's doing. And the audiobooks were just amazing for those, blew me away completely. And I've listened to them a couple of times, but I'm going to do a reread of the series physically later this year whenever Chris from A Fictional Escapist gets around to starting it. If he's still here, he's probably gone.
I was gonna say I haven't heard from him in a bit. I'm not sure. If
Yeah,
he's
he may
here,
have
but
gone and had to do other stuff, but that's fair.
I feel personally attacked. I know that feeling of like there's like when are you starting the series? I'm like I don't know. I want
Yeah,
to. There's so
he
many
gets
things.
and he gets a lot of people sending him review copies, so he plans months in advance, and I'm like, but I want to read this now. He's like, just
That's
go and
where
read it without
too.
me.
Yeah, my like the last half of last year, I was barely reading anything but review copies because I was so backed
Yeah,
up, and I'm still not quite caught up. And I feel bad. I've had to start telling people no when they reach out to me, and I hate to
yeah,
do it because I love that people are reaching out. Like the last
yeah,
person sent me like a great email, all kinds of like information, like just fantastic. Reach out, and I'm like, I am so sorry. I'm not accepting right now. I can't.
yeah,
I'm still backed up. I'm going to be backed up for months, and I have so
yeah,
many things I want to get to, and so it's hard sometimes to getting through
yeah,
things. But
totally,
it's
totally.
there's also the silver lining is because there's so many great books out there that I just
Yeah,
absolutely want to get to. So
yeah,
it's that's always the good thing. But
yeah.
I should ask. So any if we have anybody, Derek, I know you're still in the chat. Anyone else? Does
Thanks,
anybody have
Derek.
any final questions here? That's some dedication considering we're nearly hitting the 2 hour mark. Which and I knew I was figuring. I told my wife I'm like minimum hour and a half, probably closer to 2 hours because I know we're just gonna get going.
Yeah,
And so
he'll have
I
dinner
was
ready for you.
definitely. I planned I'm gonna eat first
Okay,
before
okay,
really quick. I left a little gap between when I got off work.
yeah,
So
cool.
but yeah, it's been really great talking to you
Yes,
and finding all about it. So
yeah.
to
Thank you
those
very
still
much.
here, thank you so much for coming. Definitely check out Blood of the Spear, first book of Eye of the Eternity by the
And
very talented Mark Timmony and
Starbinder,
Starbinder.
the novella.
As she reminds me, I still need to purchase a copy of that
Yeah.
book. I
Well, you
need it
can
for my
buy a
collection.
physical copy, or sign up to my newsletter, and you'll get the e-copy for free.
Yeah, e-copy is free and it's really good, and it's going to make you want a physical copy too. At least it did
For
for
the
me.
collection.
So
Yep.
I meant to talk a little more about Starbinder too, but we got on
That's
so
cool.
many tangents. But I read that and I'm just like, oh, I really want to read book 2 now even more because it just I
Good,
loved it. I
good.
loved it so much. I did tell Andrew I was just going to steal his copy if he didn't read it. So maybe that's why he finally started reading
Right.
it. So
Yes. Signed and numbered his copy. Yes.
That's why, especially after seeing his copy of Blood of the Spear, I like it was already on my list. I'd had the ebook for a while, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that book is beautiful. I gotta get a copy of it too. And
Yeah.
we had, I mean, Patrick buy one earlier just before we even talked much
Woohoo.
about the book because he's like, that's pretty. And so it works out.
Excellent.
But I say, it looks like Andrew popped back in here as we're he's been in and out, but oh my gosh, yeah, this has been a blast. So thank you so much for joining. Any final words as we wrap up?
No, thank you very much for inviting me on. It was great. Had a lot of fun, and hopefully, some people will be interested in reading the books.
Yes, absolutely. And like I've said, cannot recommend these enough. So much fun, just so many great things as we've talked about here, and also fast paced, which just you don't get with the kind of depth you're getting here very often. So great time. Definitely recommend. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you more in the future, Mark. I'll definitely have
Excellent.
to try and get some other things to get you back and keep you
Yeah, well,
lured up.
you'll get a copy of book 2, so maybe for that.
Ooh, yes, I look forward to it greatly.
Excellent.
All right. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
We're
you.
going to sign off. Oh, well, we had one last chat just right at the end. So they're like, please don't end, baby. I don't know. But bye.
Bye.